Vexnar stood at the observation window of the Federation Academy of Diplomatic Sciences, watching the transport ship descend through the purple clouds of Kelavar Prime. The Rithani diplomat was considered old by his species standards, having lived for 312 cycles. In that time, he had studied 47 different species and their methods of communication, negotiation, and conflict resolution. But nothing had prepared him for what he was about to undertake. The humans were coming. Behind him, the Academy's Grand Hall buzzed with activity. Scholars from 12 different Federation species hurried about, preparing data tablets, adjusting environmental controls, and engaging in hushed conversations about the visitors who would soon arrive. Vexnar could sense their unease. It matched his own. The humans had joined the Federation only 15 cycles ago, a remarkably short time in galactic terms. Yet in that brief period, they had proven themselves to be the most confusing, frustrating, and ultimately fascinating species the Federation had ever encountered. Their diplomatic methods defied logic, their negotiation tactics seemed chaotic, and their ability to survive situations that should have destroyed them entirely was something that demanded scientific study. That was why the Federation Council had approved this project. For the first time in history, Federation diplomats would formally study human crisis psychology. They would learn how humans responded to disasters, conflicts, and impossible situations. And most importantly, they would try to understand why humans seemed to get stronger when everything fell apart around them. The transport ship landed with a soft hum, and Vexnar turned to greet the human delegation. Ambassador Sarah Chen was the first to step off the ramp, followed by 3 other humans. She was smaller than most of her species, with dark hair tied back and eyes that held a warmth Vexnar had learned to recognize as genuine friendliness. But there was something else in those eyes too, something harder. The Rithani had seen it in human soldiers, in their emergency responders, in their leaders during times of great difficulty. Ambassador Chen smiled and extended her hand in the human greeting custom. Vexnar accepted it, feeling the strange warmth of her touch. "Senior Scholar Vexnar," she said, "thank you for having us. I'll be honest, when we received the Federation's request to study human crisis psychology, we weren't sure what to expect." "Thank you for agreeing to participate," Vexnar replied. "I must confess, Ambassador, the Federation has struggled to understand your species since first contact. You do not behave as other species do when facing difficulties. We hope this study will help us work together more effectively." Ambassador Chen's smile widened slightly. "I've read some of the preliminary reports. You're confused about why humans don't just give up when things get bad." Vexnar felt his facial tentacles shift in the Rithani expression of embarrassment. That is an oversimplification, but essentially correct. Most species in the Federation respond to extreme stress by conserving resources, reducing activity, and waiting for conditions to improve. Humans appear to do the opposite. The ambassador laughed softly. It was a sound that Vexnar had learned indicated amusement rather than aggression. "We call it spite," she said. "Sometimes the universe tells you that you can't do something, and you decide to do it anyway just to prove the universe wrong." This response only confirmed what Vexnar already suspected. Human crisis psychology operated on principles that made no logical sense to other species. That was precisely why they needed to study it. The human delegation was shown to their quarters while Vexnar gathered the research team. 12 scholars had been selected for this project, representing the major Federation species. There was Thalax, a Vordine whose aquatic biology gave them a unique perspective on stress responses. Dr. Melith represented the Corvani, whose crystalline forms processed information in ways other carbon-based species could not match. And there was Supervisor Yen, a Grelak whose 300 cycles of experience in behavioral science made them invaluable to the project. They gathered in the main research chamber, a circular room with walls that could display any information the scholars required. Currently, the walls showed images of human history, specifically moments of crisis that had shaped their species. Vexnar saw images of natural disasters, wars, plagues, and countless other calamities. Each one should have broken the humans. None of them had. "Let us begin with basic observations," Vexnar said to his colleagues. "The humans have provided us with access to their historical records, psychological studies, and personal accounts from crisis survivors. Over the next several phases, we will analyze this data and conduct interviews with the human delegation. Our goal is to create a comprehensive model of human crisis response that Federation diplomats can use in their work." Thalax raised a tentacle in question. "Senior scholar, I have reviewed some of the preliminary material. I must admit, I find much of it disturbing. The humans seem to celebrate their crises. They make stories and art about them. They tell jokes about situations that killed many of their own people. Is this not a sign of psychological damage?" Vexnar had asked himself the same question many times. That is one interpretation, but consider this. The humans have survived every crisis they have faced. They have not only survived but thrived afterward. Whatever methods they use, however strange they appear to us, they work. We are not here to judge human psychology. We are here to understand it. The first formal session with the human delegation took place the following day. Ambassador Chen had brought 3 specialists with her, each an expert in a different aspect of human crisis response. Dr. James Wright was a psychologist who had spent 40 years studying trauma and recovery. Captain Maria Santos was a former military officer who had commanded human forces during 3 major conflicts. And Professor David Okonkwo was a historian who specialized in how human societies rebuilt after collapse. They sat across from the Federation scholars in comfortable chairs designed to accommodate multiple body types. The room's environmental controls had been adjusted to suit both human and Rithani comfort levels, though Thalax remained in their portable aquatic habitat. "Before we begin," Dr. Wright said, "I think it would help if you told us exactly what confuses you about human crisis psychology. What specific behaviors are you trying to understand?" Vexnar consulted his data tablet. "There are many things, but I will start with the most basic. When the Keldar plague struck your world approximately 300 of your years ago, it killed nearly 1/3 of your population. According to our models, this should have caused complete societal collapse. Instead, records show that human civilization not only survived but entered a period of rapid advancement afterward. How is this possible?" The humans exchanged glances. There was a silent communication happening between them, something Vexnar had observed in humans before but never fully understood. "The Black Death," Professor Okonkwo said. "Yes, it was devastating, but crisis has always been a catalyst for change in human societies. The plague disrupted existing power structures. It created labor shortages that gave common workers more bargaining power. It forced people to question old assumptions and try new approaches. Crisis doesn't just destroy for humans. It also clears away obstacles that were preventing growth." "But the emotional toll," Supervisor Yen interjected. "The grief, the fear, the trauma. How did your species continue to function while experiencing such intense negative emotions?" Captain Santos leaned forward. "That's the thing you need to understand about humans. We don't stop functioning when we feel grief or fear. We function differently. Sometimes we function better. There's a concept we call flow state that some humans enter during crisis. Everything becomes clear. Actions that would normally require careful thought become automatic. The fear is still there, but it fuels us instead of paralyzing us." The Federation scholars recorded every word, but Vexnar could see that they were struggling to process what they were hearing. This was only the beginning, and already human psychology was proving more complex than they had anticipated. The study would take longer than planned, but Vexnar was determined to see it through. The Federation needed to understand these strange, resilient beings who had joined their ranks. The future of interspecies relations might depend on it. The sessions continued for many days. Each one revealed new aspects of human psychology that challenged everything the Federation scholars thought they knew about stress response and survival. They learned about concepts like gallows humor, where humans made jokes about death and disaster as a way of coping with fear. They studied something called post-traumatic growth, where humans who survived terrible experiences often reported feeling stronger and more appreciative of life afterward. And they began to understand that what they had mistaken for recklessness was actually a deep-seated refusal to accept defeat. But it was during the third week of the study that Vexnar finally began to grasp the true nature of human resilience. It happened not in a formal session, but during an informal conversation with Ambassador Chen in the Academy's observation lounge. "Can I ask you something personal, Ambassador?" Vexnar said. "Of course. Have you personally experienced what Dr. Wright calls post-traumatic growth?" Ambassador Chen was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the stars visible through the window. "When I was 23 years old," she said finally, "there was an accident at the space station where I was completing my training. A hull breach killed 17 people, including my mentor and 2 of my closest friends. I was trapped in a damaged section for 47 hours before rescue arrived. I had to watch the oxygen counter slowly decrease and accept that I might not survive." Vexnar felt his tentacles curl in distress. "I am sorry. I did not mean to cause you pain by asking." The ambassador shook her head. "It's fine. That experience is part of why I'm here. During those 47 hours, I discovered something about myself. I discovered that I was not going to give up. Not because I was brave or special, but because giving up just wasn't something I knew how to do. And when I was finally rescued, I made a decision. I was going to spend my life helping humans and other species work together so that fewer people would have to face those moments alone." She turned to look at Vexnar directly. "That's human resilience, senior scholar. It's not about being unaffected by crisis. It's about being transformed by it. We break, but we break in ways that let us rebuild ourselves stronger. We carry our scars with us, and those scars remind us of what we've overcome." Vexnar understood then that this study was going to change not just how the Federation viewed humans, but how they viewed crisis itself. Humans did not fear breaking. They trusted in their ability to heal, and that trust gave them a power that no other species in the Federation had ever developed. The real work was just beginning. The Academy's research chamber had become a second home to Vexnar and his fellow scholars over the past 30 days. The walls now displayed complex diagrams mapping human psychological responses, timelines of historical crises, and comparative analyses between human and other species behaviors. But for all their data collection, Vexnar knew they were still missing something fundamental. "We have documented their behaviors," Dr. Meleth said during their morning review session. "The Corvani's crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated frustration. But we have not explained them. Why do humans run toward danger when every instinct should drive them away? Why do they form stronger social bonds during crisis instead of competing for resources? These patterns exist in no other Federation species." Thalax bubbled in agreement from their aquatic chamber. "The Vordine faced a similar planetary crisis 2,000 cycles ago. A volcanic event threatened our primary ocean. We responded by dispersing into smaller, isolated groups to maximize survival chances. The humans faced similar extinction threats multiple times. They responded by gathering together and fighting back against the threat itself. This is not logical." Vexnar had spent the previous night reviewing historical records from the human database. One account in particular had kept him awake, turning the story over in his mind. "Perhaps we need to experience human crisis response directly rather than simply studying it from outside. I would like to propose an unusual research method." The other scholars waited as Vexnar gathered his thoughts. "The humans have agreed to share their simulation technology with us. They use it to train emergency responders and military personnel. I am proposing that we, the research team, undergo one of these crisis simulations. We will experience what humans experience in disaster situations. We will observe how they respond while we are responding ourselves. This may provide insights that passive study cannot. The proposal caused significant debate among the scholars. The GRELAC representative, Supervisor Yin, was particularly concerned. Our species do not respond well to simulated threats. The psychological impact could be severe. But Dr. Melith supported the idea. We cannot understand human resilience without understanding the situations that create it. I agree with senior scholar Vexnar. We must experience crisis firsthand. Ambassador Chen was consulted about the proposal. She listened carefully, then nodded slowly. We can arrange this, but I want you to understand something first. Our simulations are designed to feel real. They have to feel real or they don't work. You will experience fear. You may experience emotions you've never felt before. Are you certain you want to proceed? The scholars agreed, though Vexnar noticed that several of them seemed less confident than their words suggested. He understood their hesitation. He shared it, but he also knew that understanding humans was too important to let fear prevent them from trying. The simulation was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, Captain Santos worked with the scholars to prepare them for what they would face. She explained human emergency protocols, basic survival techniques, and most importantly, the psychological tools that humans use to manage fear. The key, she told them during one session, is to focus on what you can control. When everything is falling apart, your mind will try to process everything at once. You'll feel overwhelmed. But if you can narrow your focus to the immediate problem, the thing you can actually do something about, then you can function. One step at a time. That's how humans survive impossible situations. Supervisor Yin's 3 eye stalks swiveled in confusion. But what about the larger threat? If you ignore the overall situation, how can you respond appropriately? You don't ignore it, Captain Santos said. You acknowledge it, and then you put it aside. There's a phrase we use. You can't eat an elephant all at once, but you can eat it one bite at a time. It means that even the biggest problems can be solved if you break them down into smaller pieces and address each piece individually. The GRELAC considered this. This seems inefficient. Surely a comprehensive response plan would be more effective than addressing problems piece by piece. Captain Santos smiled, but there was something sad in her expression. Comprehensive response plans are great when you have time to make them and resources to implement them. But in a real crisis, you often have neither. You have to work with what you have, right now in this moment. Humans have learned to do that because we had no other choice. The species that waited for perfect conditions didn't survive. We did. The day of the simulation arrived. The scholars gathered in a large chamber that had been converted into what the humans called a holographic training environment. The technology was impressive, capable of creating physical sensations through direct neural stimulation combined with hard light constructions. Vexnar understood the theory, but experiencing it was entirely different. The simulation began calmly enough. They were placed in a scenario representing a Federation outpost on a remote moon. Everything seemed normal. The soft hum of life support systems, the distant view of stars through the viewports, the quiet conversations of simulated personnel going about their work. Then the alarm started. Red lights flashed throughout the station. A synthetic voice announced a hull breach in the eastern sector, followed by a secondary explosion in the power core. The simulated personnel around them began to panic, some running toward emergency stations, others frozen in fear. Vexnar felt his body react in ways he had not expected. His heart's beat faster. His tentacles wanted to curl protectively around his body. Every instinct screamed at him to find a safe place and hide. He looked at his fellow scholars and saw similar reactions. Thalex's aquatic chamber had clouded with stress hormones. Dr. Melith's crystalline form had dimmed significantly. Supervisor Yin had frozen entirely, their eye stalks retracted into their body. But the humans moved differently. Captain Santos was suddenly in the center of the chaos, her voice cutting through the alarm sounds with sharp, clear commands. Environmental suits now. Seal the bulkhead doors in sequence. We need a damage assessment immediately. She grabbed Vexnar by his upper appendage. Senior Scholar, I need you to help coordinate the other Federation members. Can you do that? The question shocked him out of his paralysis. She was asking him to take action. She was treating him as a fellow responder rather than a helpless victim. Something in him responded to that. He straightened, pushed his fear aside, and nodded. What do you need me to do? Get to the communication station. We need to send out a distress call. The panel is damaged, but I think you can reroute through the secondary systems. Can you do that? Vexnar had no idea if he could do that. His technical training was minimal, but Captain Santos was looking at him with complete confidence, as if she had no doubt he would succeed. He found himself moving toward the communication station before he had consciously decided to try. The next hour was the most intense of Vexnar's 312 cycles of life. He worked on systems he barely understood, following instructions that Captain Santos and Dr. Wright called out between managing other aspects of the crisis. Around him, the other Federation scholars began to emerge from their initial shock. Thalax found a way to use their aquatic habitat's life support systems to supplement the station's failing air filtration. Dr. Melith's crystalline form proved capable of detecting microscopic hull fractures that the sensors had missed. Even Supervisor Yen recovered enough to coordinate evacuation protocols using their extensive knowledge of group behavior. But it was Professor Okonkwo's actions that taught Vexnar the most important lesson of the simulation. Partway through the crisis, a simulated explosion caused a section of ceiling to collapse near where several scholars were working. One of the Corvani researchers, a junior scholar named Thelin, became trapped under debris. Their crystalline form could withstand the weight, but they could not free themselves. Vexnar expected Professor Okonkwo to call for equipment or develop a careful extraction plan. Instead, the humans simply walked into the debris field, knelt beside Thelin, and began talking to them. "I'm going to get you out of here," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Can you tell me your name?" "Thelin," the Corvani managed. "I am Junior Scholar Thelin." "Good to meet you, Thelin. I'm David. Now I need you to do something for me. I need you to focus on my voice. Not on the debris, not on the alarms, just on my voice. Can you do that?" Yes, I can try." Professor Okonkwo continued talking as he worked to shift the debris. He asked Thelin about their research, about their homeworld, about their favorite subjects of study. The questions seemed irrelevant to the crisis, but Vexnar noticed that Thelin's distress signals were decreasing. The Corvani's crystalline form was brightening again. Captain Santos appeared beside Vexnar. "Watch what he's doing," she said quietly. "That's called grounding. He's giving Thelin something familiar to focus on, something that isn't the crisis. It helps the brain function better when you can anchor yourself to something normal." But shouldn't he be focused entirely on the rescue? He is focused on the rescue, but he's also taking care of Thelin's psychological state. In a real crisis, keeping people calm can be just as important as solving the physical problems. Panicked people make mistakes. Calm people survive. Thelin was freed within minutes. The simulated crisis continued for another hour before the rescue ships arrived and the scenario ended. When the holographic environment faded and the scholars found themselves back in the normal training chamber, Vexnar felt something he had never experienced before. He felt proud of himself, not because he had performed perfectly, but because he had tried. He had faced a situation that should have paralyzed him, and he had found a way to act. Dr. Wright approached the Federation scholars as they processed the experience. "How do you feel?" Vexnar searched for the right words. "I feel changed. During the crisis I was still afraid, but the fear did not control me. I was able to think, to act. I did not know I was capable of that." The human psychologist nodded. "That's exactly how it works. Resilience isn't about not feeling fear. It's about finding a way to function despite the fear. And like any skill, it gets stronger with practice. Every crisis you survive teaches you that you can survive crisis. The fear never goes away entirely, but your confidence in your own ability to handle it grows." "Is this why humans seem almost eager to face difficulties?" Thalax asked from their chamber. "Because each difficulty makes you stronger." "Partly," Dr. Wright admitted. "There's also a cultural element. Human societies have always valued those who face challenges head-on. Our heroes aren't the ones who avoided problems. They're the ones who solved them, often against impossible odds. We raise our children on stories of people who refuse to give up. That shapes how we think about ourselves and our capabilities." Ambassador Chen joined the group. She looked at the Federation scholars with an expression of respect that Vexnar had not seen before. "You all did well in there, better than many humans do on their first simulation. I want you to remember how you felt during that exercise. Remember that you were afraid, and remember that you acted anyway. That's the essence of what we're trying to teach you." Vexnar understood then that the study was no longer about observing humans from outside. They had become participants in the human experience of crisis, and in doing so, they had discovered something that would change the Federation forever. Resilience could be learned. It was not a genetic trait unique to humans. It was a skill, a mindset, a way of approaching the universe that any species could develop. The scholars spent the following weeks analyzing their experience in the simulation and comparing it to the human research data. Patterns began to emerge that they had not seen before. They started to understand not just what humans did in crisis situations, but why those behaviors worked. Dr. Melith made a breakthrough during one of their analysis sessions. "I believe I have identified a key factor," the Corvani announced. "Humans do not view themselves as separate from their environment during a crisis. They view themselves as active agents within a dynamic system. When conditions change, they change with them. They adapt not by resisting the change, but by incorporating it into their response." This insight led to further discoveries. The scholars began to see connections between human crisis psychology and human social structures, technology development, and even art. Humans had built their entire civilization on a foundation of adaptive resilience. Every aspect of their culture reflected this fundamental approach to existence. But the true test of their understanding was yet to come. None of them knew that a real crisis was approaching, one that would force them to apply everything they had learned. The alert came during what should have been a routine diplomatic session. Vexnar was meeting with Ambassador Chen and Dr. Wright in one of the Academy's smaller conference rooms when the building's warning systems activated. This was not a simulation. "Seismic activity detected," the Academy's artificial intelligence announced. "Magnitude 7.3, epicenter approximately 40 kilometers south of this location. Tsunami warning in effect for all coastal regions." Kelevar Prime was an ocean world with scattered island landmasses. The Federation Academy sat on one of the larger islands, elevated enough to be safe from most tsunamis. But the seismic activity was unprecedented in the planet's recorded history. The crystal formations that made up the island's foundation had always been considered geologically stable. Ambassador Chen was on her feet before the announcement finished. "We need to get to the Emergency Coordination Center. Now." Vexnar followed her without hesitation. 3 months ago, he would have frozen or sought clarification about proper protocols. Now, he understood that crisis did not wait for protocols. You acted first and organized later. The Emergency Coordination Center was chaos when they arrived. Scholars from dozens of species crowded the space, most of them showing signs of severe stress. The Vordine delegates had retreated into their aquatic chambers. The Grelac representatives were producing high-pitched stress sounds that made communication difficult. Even the usually unflappable Corvani were showing instability in their crystalline forms. But the humans were already working. Captain Santos had taken position at the central communication array, coordinating with off-world vessels and emergency services. Professor Okonkwo was organizing the panicking scholars into groups, giving each group a specific task to focus on. And Ambassador Chen was speaking with the Academy's Rithani director, her voice calm but firm. "We need to establish priorities," she said. "Life safety first, then structural assessment, then recovery planning. Can your people handle the structural evaluation while my team coordinates evacuation protocols?" The director's tentacles moved in distressed patterns. "Ambassador, you do not understand. This island has never experienced seismic activity of this magnitude. We do not have protocols for this. We do not have training for this." "Then we'll create protocols as we go. That's how it works. What resources do you have available right now?" Vexnar watched the exchange with new eyes. He could see what Ambassador Chen was doing. She was breaking down an overwhelming situation into manageable pieces, exactly as Captain Santos had taught them during the simulation training. And she was giving the director something to focus on other than the fear. Another tremor shook the building. Several of the crystalline support columns showed new fractures. A section of ceiling in the eastern wing collapsed, filling the air with dust and debris. Without consciously deciding to move, Vexnar found himself heading toward the collapse zone. 3 Grelac scholars had been in that section. He could hear their distress calls through the dust. Dr. Wright appeared beside him. "I'll help. We need to move quickly but carefully. Some of those structural elements are still unstable." Together, they worked their way through the debris. Vexnar used his tentacles to clear smaller pieces while Dr. Wright assessed the larger structural elements. It was dangerous work, but Vexnar found himself operating in a state of focused calm that he would not have thought possible 3 months earlier. They found the first Grelac partially buried under a collapsed wall section. The scholar was conscious but clearly injured. Dr. Wright immediately began what he called triage assessment, checking for life-threatening injuries while keeping up a stream of reassuring conversation. "We're going to get you out of here," he told the Grelac. "I'm Dr. Wright. Can you tell me your name?" The pattern was the same one Professor Okonkwo had used in the simulation. Vexnar understood now that it was not just a technique. It was a fundamental part of human crisis response, a way of maintaining connection and hope even in the worst situations. They freed all 3 Grelac scholars within 20 minutes. By then, the other Federation scholars had organized themselves into work teams, following the model the humans had established. Thalax was using their aquatic expertise to assess water damage and flood risks. Dr. Melith was coordinating structural analysis using their unique crystalline senses. Supervisor Yen had overcome their initial paralysis and was managing communication between the different groups. It was not perfect. There were moments of confusion, missed communications, near accidents, but the Academy was functioning. The scholars were responding to the crisis instead of being overwhelmed by it. Ambassador Chen found Vexnar during a brief pause in the activity. Her face was covered with dust, and her uniform was torn, but her eyes still held that combination of warmth and steel that he had noticed at their first meeting. "You're doing well," she said. "All of you are. I know this isn't what you expected when you signed up to study human crisis psychology." Vexnar's tentacles moved in a pattern of ironic amusement. "I believe this is what Dr. Wright would call experiential learning. Though I admit, I would have preferred a more controlled experiment." The ambassador laughed, that strange human sound that indicated amusement in the face of difficulty. "Welcome to the human experience, senior scholar. This is how we learn everything. By getting thrown into situations we're not ready for and figuring it out as we go." A new tremor interrupted their conversation. This one felt different somehow, deeper and more prolonged. The Academy's warning systems activated again. Secondary fault line destabilization detected. Major seismic event probability, 93% within the next 3 hours. Recommend immediate evacuation to high ground. The Academy's location had been chosen for its stability, but there was no higher ground nearby. Evacuation would require transportation that might not arrive in time. Ambassador Chen's expression shifted. Vexnar had learned to read human faces over the past months, and he recognized what he saw now. This was not fear exactly. It was the look of someone facing a serious problem and preparing to solve it. "We need to get everyone to the reinforced sections of the building," she said. "And we need to contact the orbital station for emergency extraction. How many people are in the Academy right now?" "Approximately 240 scholars, staff, and visitors," Vexnar replied. "But the orbital shuttles can only carry 30 at a time, and the round trip takes approximately 45 minutes. The math was not encouraging. Even with multiple shuttles, they could not evacuate everyone before the predicted major event. Someone was going to have to stay behind. Captain Santos joined them, having overheard the conversation. "We prioritize critical personnel for the first evacuations. The injured, the young, those with essential skills that can't be replaced. The rest of us find the strongest part of the building and shelter in place." "That is not acceptable," Vexnar said. "We cannot ask people to remain in danger while others are evacuated to safety." "We're not asking," Captain Santos said. "We're making a tactical decision based on available resources. It's not about who deserves to be saved. It's about maximizing the number of survivors. If we try to evacuate everyone at once, we might lose people in the chaos. If we do this systematically, we save as many as possible." It was cold logic, but Vexnar realized it was also correct. In a crisis, difficult choices had to be made. Waiting for perfect solutions meant accepting worse outcomes. The next 2 hours were a blur of activity. Vexnar worked alongside humans and other Federation species, moving injured scholars to evacuation points, reinforcing structural weaknesses, and preparing shelters for those who would have to wait out the coming event. Throughout it all, the humans remained steady, their calm focus spreading to the others around them. Vexnar understood now that this was perhaps the most important aspect of human crisis psychology. It was contagious. When humans remained calm in crisis, others followed their example. When humans took action, others were inspired to act. The resilience that had seemed like a unique human trait was actually a shared capacity that could be awakened in any species through example and practice. The major seismic event struck 57 minutes before the last shuttle arrived. The building shook with violence that threw people from their feet and sent cracks spreading through walls and floors. Sections of the Academy collapsed entirely, but the shelters held. The reinforcements that the scholars had built together protected those who could not be evacuated in time. When the shaking finally stopped, Vexnar emerged from the shelter to find a world transformed. The Academy was severely damaged, but most of it remained standing. Around him, scholars from a dozen species were picking themselves up, checking on each other, beginning the work of recovery. And in the center of it all stood the humans, already organizing the next phase of the response. The rescue operations continued for 3 days. By the time the last survivor was found, the crisis had taken 17 lives, a tragedy but far fewer than the models had predicted for an event of this magnitude. The Academy's quick response, modeled on human crisis protocols, had saved dozens of additional lives. Ambassador Chen found Vexnar on the 4th day, sitting in the ruins of the observation lounge where they had first discussed human resilience. The window was shattered now, the comfortable chairs buried under debris, but the view of the stars remained, unchanged despite the chaos below. The Federation Council wants a preliminary report, she said, sitting down beside him on a piece of broken wall. They want to know what we've learned. Vexnar was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. I have learned many things, Ambassador. I have learned that humans do not survive crises through strength alone, but through connection. You support each other. You draw strength from each other. And you extend that support to anyone who stands with you, regardless of species. What else? I have learned that fear is not the enemy of action. It is simply another factor to be managed. Humans feel fear as intensely as any other species, but you have developed techniques, cultural practices, and mental frameworks that allow you to function despite that fear. And these techniques can be taught. Ambassador Chen nodded slowly. That's the most important lesson, I think. Resilience isn't magic. It's not something you're born with or without. It's something you build through experience, through practice, through choosing to act even when everything tells you to give up. There is one more thing, Vexnar said. I have learned why humans are so important to the Federation. It is not your technology or your resources or your military capability. It is this. He gestured at the destroyed academy, at the rescue workers still searching for survivors, at the scholars of multiple species working side by side. You show us what is possible. You show us that we are capable of more than we believe. The ambassador was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than Vexnar had ever heard it. That's what we've always wanted. Not to be admired or feared, but to help. Every time we reach out to other species, we're hoping to find partners who can face the universe with us. You've shown that the Federation is ready for that partnership. This crisis proved it. Vexnar's tentacles moved in a complex pattern expressing emotions he did not have words for. The study will continue, he said finally, but its purpose has changed. We are no longer trying to understand human resilience as an external phenomenon. We are trying to develop it within ourselves, to share it across the Federation. If we succeed, the galaxy will be stronger for it. Ambassador Chen smiled, and Vexnar realized he was smiling too, in the Rithani fashion. They sat together in the ruins, watching the stars, contemplating the future that waited to be built. The formal report on the Human Resilience Understanding Crisis Psychology Project was presented to the Federation Council 6 months after the seismic event on Kelavar Prime. Vexnar stood before the assembled representatives of 147 species, his data displays showing the culmination of months of research, experience, and reflection. Distinguished representatives, he began, I present to you the findings of the most important study ever conducted by the Federation Academy of Diplomatic Sciences. Not because our methodology was superior or our sample size larger than previous studies, but because this study has fundamentally changed how we understand ourselves and our place in the galaxy. The display behind him showed images from the crisis, scholars of different species working together, humans leading emergency responses, Federation members adapting to challenges they had never faced before. The visual narrative told a story that Vexnar's words could only supplement. When we began this study, we sought to understand how humans survive situations that destroy other species. We expected to find biological advantages, perhaps unique neural structures or evolutionary adaptations. What we found instead was something far more valuable. We found a set of psychological tools, cultural practices, and social structures that any species can learn and apply. Dr. Melith contributed the next portion of the presentation, their crystalline form projecting additional data visualizations. Human resilience is not mystical or genetic. It is built on 4 pillars: cognitive flexibility, social connection, purpose-driven action, and adaptive learning. Each of these pillars can be deliberately cultivated through training and practice. The Corvani scholar explained each pillar in detail, drawing on examples from both the formal study and the real crisis that had followed. Cognitive flexibility referred to the human ability to reassess situations rapidly and change strategies when initial approaches failed. Social connection described how humans drew strength from their relationships and prioritized group survival over individual safety. Purpose-driven action captured the human tendency to find meaning even in suffering, transforming painful experiences into motivation for positive change. Adaptive learning meant that humans treated every failure as education, becoming more capable with each challenge they faced. Captain Santos presented the military and emergency response implications. Federation forces have traditionally relied on rigid protocols designed for specific scenarios. Human crisis response takes a different approach. We train our people in principles and techniques, then trust them to apply those principles creatively when facing novel situations. This flexibility comes at a cost. Our training is longer and more intensive. But the result is personnel who can function effectively even when everything goes wrong. She showed examples from Federation military history, where rigid adherence to protocols had led to disasters that flexible response could have prevented. She also showed examples where Federation forces had successfully adopted human-style adaptive tactics, with dramatic improvements in outcomes. Professor Okonkwo addressed the broader civilizational implications. Human history is defined by crisis. We evolved on a geologically active planet with unpredictable climate, abundant predators, and frequent natural disasters. Every aspect of our development was shaped by the need to survive situations that seemed unsurvivable. But the crucial point is this: the traits we developed were not selected for genetically. They were selected for culturally. Humans who gave up in crisis did not survive to pass on their genes. But more importantly, societies that gave up in crisis did not survive to pass on their cultures. He explained how human crisis psychology had become embedded in their stories, their religions, their political systems, and their educational practices. Every human child was raised on tales of heroes who refused to surrender, communities that rebuilt after devastation, and ordinary people who discovered extraordinary capabilities when circumstances demanded it. This cultural programming created expectations that shaped behavior. When humans face crisis, Professor Okonkwo concluded, they believe they can survive because they have been told all their lives that survival is possible. This belief becomes self-fulfilling. They take actions that other species might not attempt because they genuinely expect those actions to succeed. And because they believe in success, they try harder, persist longer, and find solutions that pessimistic species would never discover. Dr. Wright presented the psychological research, including data from the simulation training and observations from the real crisis. What we documented on Kelivar Prime was remarkable. Federation scholars who had never faced serious emergency situations developed adaptive responses within hours. They reported experiences consistent with human accounts of crisis psychology: heightened focus, reduced sensitivity to pain and discomfort, increased emotional connection with others, and a sense of time distortion that allowed them to perform complex tasks under extreme pressure. He showed neural scans and physiological measurements comparing the Federation scholars before and after their crisis experience. The changes were significant. Stress response patterns had shifted from maladaptive avoidance toward adaptive engagement. Cognitive flexibility scores had increased. Social bonding indicators had strengthened. These scholars did not become human, Dr. Wright emphasized. They retained their species-specific psychology in all important respects, but they developed new capabilities layered on top of their existing mental structures. Capabilities that we had previously thought were uniquely human. This proves definitively that crisis resilience is a learnable skill, not a biological inheritance. Vexnar resumed the presentation for its conclusion. The recommendations of this study are as follows. First, the Federation should establish crisis resilience training as a standard component of diplomatic and military education. The techniques developed by humans can be adapted for each species-specific psychology and implemented throughout Federation institutions. He advanced to the next display, showing plans for new training facilities and curriculum outlines. Second, the Federation should revise its emergency response protocols to incorporate adaptive principles. Rather than relying solely on rigid procedures, we should train our personnel to apply general principles creatively in novel situations. The next display showed proposed changes to Federation doctrine. Third, we should study and preserve the cultural practices that humans use to build resilience. Their stories, rituals, and social structures contain centuries of accumulated wisdom about surviving hardship. This cultural knowledge is as valuable as any technology. Fourth and finally, Vexnar said, his voice taking on a weight that reflected the significance of his words, the Federation should recognize humanity not merely as a new member species, but as a teacher. They have something to offer that no other species has provided, a living example of how to face the universe without surrendering to despair. The council chamber was silent as the implications of this recommendation sank in. For 300 years, the Federation had operated on an assumption of equality among member species. No species was formally recognized as superior in any category. What Vexnar was proposing would change that paradigm. Ambassador Chen rose to address the council directly. Distinguished representatives, I want to clarify what this recommendation means and what it does not mean. Humanity does not seek special status or authority within the Federation. We do not claim to be better than other species, wiser, or more deserving of leadership. What we offer is simply what we have, experience in surviving against odds that seem impossible. She walked to the center of the chamber, speaking to each section in turn. Every species here has faced challenges unique to their world and their history. Every species has wisdom to contribute. Humanity's contribution is not superiority but a particular kind of expertise. We know how to keep going when everything tells us to stop. We know how to find hope when hope seems foolish. We know how to rebuild after destruction. These are not virtues we chose. They are adaptations forced upon us by a harsh universe, but they are adaptations we can share. The Vordine representative raised a tendril in query. Ambassador, the Federation has encountered hostile species before, including species that seemed unstoppable. Each time, we survived through cooperation and superior resources. How is the human contribution different? Because the threats facing the Federation are evolving, Ambassador Chen replied. The universe is not becoming safer. We have detected evidence of phenomena beyond our current understanding. Gravitational anomalies that defy physics, energy signatures that suggest intelligence far beyond any known species, spatial distortions that could indicate the existence of entities from other dimensions. The challenges ahead may be unlike anything we have faced. When they come, the species that survive will not be those with the most resources or the best technology. They will be the species that refuse to give up. Supervisor Yin, representing the Grelak contingent, spoke next. I was present during the crisis on Kelivar Prime. I observed the human response firsthand. I also observed my own response, which was initially paralysis and terror. But under human guidance, I was able to overcome these reactions and contribute to the rescue efforts. I support the recommendations of this study. The techniques the humans taught us saved lives that day, including possibly my own. One by one, other representatives who had been present during the crisis offered similar testimonials. The evidence accumulated until even the most skeptical council members could not deny the value of what humans had demonstrated. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous but showed an overwhelming majority in favor of the study's recommendations. The Federation would establish crisis resilience training programs. Protocols would be revised. Cultural exchange initiatives would be expanded. And humanity would be formally recognized as a teaching partner in the development of Federation emergency response capabilities. After the session, Vexnar found a quiet balcony overlooking the council building's gardens. The sky of the council's host planet was purple and orange at sunset, beautiful in a way he had not appreciated before the crisis. He had learned that from the humans too, the tendency to notice beauty more intensely after facing destruction. Ambassador Chen joined him after a few minutes. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the clouds in deepening colors. "You know," she said eventually, "when we first made contact with the Federation, there were debates on Earth about whether to join. Some people thought we were too different, too aggressive, too chaotic. They worried that the older, more established species would look down on us or try to change us." "And what did you think?" Vexnar asked. "I thought the galaxy needed us, not because we're better than anyone else, but because we're different. We see problems that other species accept as permanent. We try solutions that others dismiss as impossible. Sometimes we fail spectacularly, but sometimes we succeed in ways that change everything." She turned to look at him directly. Today was one of those times. The Federation just voted to study our psychology like it was a technology. They're going to teach other species to think like us in crisis situations. That's not a small thing, Vexnar. That's a fundamental shift in how the galaxy views humanity. Vexnar's tentacles moved thoughtfully. "Do you believe the Federation can truly learn what you have to teach? Some of the resilience we documented seems rooted in uniquely human experiences." "I believe that crisis is universal," Ambassador Chen said. "Every species on every world will eventually face moments when survival seems impossible. What humans have learned is that those moments are not endings. They're opportunities. Opportunities to discover capabilities you didn't know you had. Opportunities to form bonds that wouldn't exist in comfortable times. Opportunities to find meaning in struggle that you could never find in ease." She looked back at the sunset, her expression contemplative. "The galaxy is going to face challenges that make our current problems look trivial, challenges that might last for generations. When those times come, the species that survive won't be the strongest or the smartest. They'll be the ones who refuse to believe that extinction is inevitable. They'll be the ones who find reasons to keep fighting even when logic says to surrender." "And that is what you teach," Vexnar said. "That's what we live. Teaching is just explaining what comes naturally to us." She smiled slightly. "Though I have to admit, having a 300-year-old Rithani scholar validate our approach does feel pretty good." Vexnar made the Rithani sound of amusement. "I am only 312, barely middle-aged by my species standards. Still older than any human who ever lived. And you spent the last 6 months learning to think like a species that lives less than a third of your lifespan. That takes courage." "It takes necessity," Vexnar corrected. "The universe does not ask whether we are ready for its challenges. It simply presents them. The choice is to adapt or to fail. Thanks to this study, the Federation now has better tools for adaptation." They watched the last light fade from the sky as the first stars became visible. Somewhere among those stars, new challenges were forming, new threats that would test everything the Federation had learned. But for the first time in his long career, Vexnar faced that future with something resembling human optimism. Not because he believed nothing bad would happen, but because he now understood that bad things happening was not the end of the story. It was simply the beginning of the next chapter. And chapters, as the humans had taught him, were meant to be written by those who refused to put down the pen. The Federation would survive, not because it was guaranteed, but because its members would now know how to fight for survival even when the odds seemed impossible. That knowledge, more than any weapon or technology, was humanity's gift to the galaxy. And Vexnar, 312 cycles old and wiser than he had ever been, was grateful to have helped bring that gift to his people. In the end, understanding human crisis psychology had taught him something even more valuable than survival techniques. It had taught him hope, not the naive hope that believes nothing will go wrong, but the fierce, determined hope that believes nothing can break us completely. The hope that sees darkness as a temporary condition and light as the natural state that always returns. That, perhaps, was the most human thing of all.